Learn It from a Layman. I'm Carl Christensen. I'm back with Matt and Tim.
Tim, who we are not going to insult this time.
Are we not? Who's we?
The Illuminati wants you to insult me.
Of course they do. That was one of their rites of passage. Okay, so it's been a couple of weeks. We were out on vacation and such, so glad to be back. Today we're going to be discussing conspiracy theories. So we can talk the basics of conspiracy theories. We're going to touch on a few well-known conspiracy theories, and then talk kind of about the psychology behind them, ways that why certain people get sucked into them, and what you can do to ferret out conspiracy theories and make sure that you're not falling prey to some online disinformation. So let's start with probably the most well-known conspiracy theory, and that is the moon landing.
Well, should we maybe start with what is a conspiracy theory?
That's a good point. Sure. So
yeah, go ahead.
So obviously, a conspiracy theory basically is the idea that some group or collection of people are conspiring, generally to keep something that wouldn't want to be known, or they wouldn't want the public to know, to keep that secret or to cover something up.
Yeah, obscure the truth through a secret agreement of some sort.
Right. So the idea that particular groups of people have a motive in mind and therefore are conspiring to obfuscate and otherwise cloud the truth.
Right.
And so that could cover a whole slew of ideas and philosophy anyway. But when we talk conspiracy theories, you're usually limiting it to specific fleshed out ideas that people have put out there about specific events that just isn't true, or at least not accepted by the vast majority of people.
The Illuminati does not want you to believe conspiracy theories are things, but by listening to Learn It from a Layman, you can get educated on what's really happening in the world.
That's right, you can.
And be able to think for yourself, unlike all of the sheeple around you.
Thanks, Matt. Now I have to change my address and shave my head, or they'll find me.
Yes.
Well, there are many advantages to having a shaved head. Your foil cap fits quite a bit better if it doesn't have hair to contend with.
Right.
Oh boy. Okay. So the most well-known conspiracy theory, at least probably in my generation, is that of the moon landing. That was the United States moon landing, to be specific, at the one in 1969. Fact check me here, guys. I think that was it. By Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. And the idea that the United States, despite all of the press coverage and all of the evidence that would seem to indicate that we had been to the moon, that it was all just a conspiracy theory. It was all the government trying to essentially propagandize the technology and the space race that we had going against the Soviet Union at the time. So, Tim, I believe, were you in the class in college where we had to discuss the moon landing and why that conspiracy theory exists?
I was, yeah. That was the general science class, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So, can you summarize what some of the concerns are of those that believe in the conspiracy theory?
And then can you explain why that university subsequently lost its accreditation?
That's right.
To be clear, it wasn't actually teaching us that there was no moon landing. It was trying to teach us to think critically. Go ahead, Tim.
That bonus knowledge that you guys picked up?
So, yeah, in this science class, teaching basic scientific processes and thinking, and so we talked about conspiracy theories. So we had to actually look at I believe a couple of different websites. One making the case for the moon landing being a hoax, and another kind of debunking all of those things. So the hoax site, it brought up a number of inexplicable facts, like if you look at the pictures of the moonwalk, the shadow goes the wrong way. It shouldn't be going that way, and other things like that. That kind of pointing at all these little things and putting it all together to just raise questions. And you'll find a lot of times that that's actually a technique that conspiracy theorists will use. They kind of soft shoe and say, "Oh, I just want to bring up some questions," that you kind of shroud this kind of thinking with a reasonable and thoughtful demeanor.
You're giving them a
Even
little
though
bit too much credit. Some of these conspiracy theorist crowds have no interest in being thoughtful and or reasonable. But
well, that is true. You get all types. And and in the defense of well, I'm going to speak to this later, so I'll get to that later. But yeah, so I remember in particular the shadow being one of the things that they brought up, that this is clearly fabricated, because that's not how it should go. Um, of course, then when you went to the debunker site, it explained in detail kind of how things went and why the shadow looked the way it did. And once you had a full explanation, it made perfect sense. But without context, it might look a little funny.
yeah, so I think that's one of the big things that I know about, conspiracy theories, and the few that we're going to discuss here is that it's contextualists and or very basic and therefore kind of childish understanding of some of the facts, and therefore being able to paint something in a light that where it looks questionable, right? Where
contextualist, you mean has no context?
That's the word I was going for, but this is learn it from a layman, Matt.
That was actually several words, but yes, whatever.
Right. So, you bring something up in isolation, you say, oh, but the sun would have been pointing this way. So you kind of take it at the set of facts that you have already available to you based on your layman understanding, and be like, oh, so that doesn't make any sense. Therefore, this isn't true, or therefore this is a conspiracy. And so you don't really dig any deeper, and you don't try to understand and add context to the situation. And by dig deeper, I don't mean look for other things that you could point at and be like, oh, that's why this is still a conspiracy, but try to understand that specific thing in context of the actual mission and the environment that they were dealing in. So I do have an anecdote. So this, Tim did say, so some of these people, conspiracy theorists, people that believe this and or get behind it, and are sometimes quite reasonable people otherwise. And I actually did have a friend that I still, a very intelligent guy, great guy personally to get along with, and very friendly. And I remember we were over at his house once, and I was talking, and I said something about the moon landing hoax. Not that I believe it's a hoax, but just that idea that, people, there are people out there that don't believe that we landed on the moon. And he kind of raised an eyebrow, and he chuckled to himself, and he's like, he's like, I don't really fully believe that it's a hoax, but he's like, I do have questions. And so, so there are there are reasonable people that fall prey to some of these ideas just because they don't spend the time looking at it, and they see some of these questions brought up, and the whole group of people that are saying it's a conspiracy, and therefore they think, oh, well, maybe I don't understand something, so maybe it isn't, maybe I shouldn't really believe that, and then they don't tend to spend the time to actually figure out, oh no, actually none of that information is accurate.
And going off of that for just a second, I want to kind of comment on that. I speak with disdain of the people who believe in conspiracy theories that I see clearly as false, right? But I need to retain a sense of humility when I look at and talk to and think of those people, because really, the tendency to go in on a conspiracy theory, I think there are some natural human tendencies that incline us all in that direction in some ways. And so seeing someone who's been taken by a conspiracy theory, I should check myself before I kind of smirk and look at them sideways, because I very well could be me on a different issue. I think we should all have some humility.
Do we want to talk now? It seems like that's kind of a natural flow into why some people go into these things, like some of the reasons.
Sure.
So, fundamentally, a lot of this is based around whether or not you trust different sources. And yeah, a lot of it comes down to who do you trust. And unfortunately, in the world, there have been many examples of entities that should be trustworthy that are not. Ideally, your government, you should trust it because your government has your best interests in mind. Well, that hasn't been always the case. In the United States, there have been a number of times where the government has done things that were more or less really bad and actually attempted to cover it up. Different. I'm not going to go into any of the specifics because it's far easier to point at other governments. So in recent events, you actually do see conspiracies happening in, well, Russia. Let's not beat around the bush. Where truth is being deliberately obscured by the powerful few to feed the masses a wad of information. And it works to greater or lesser extent. And the type of person that buys into that will look then at contrary reporting, Western media and things, and say, oh, well, that's all just a conspiracy to discredit the motherland. It's a vicious cycle of conspiracying. But the fact is, in the world, that actually does happen. Entities that are supposed to be trusted and interested in the well-being of others are not. They're malicious actors. They deliberately twist and distort truth. And when you notice that happening in the world, you start to question, and you start to question everything. And then when we do, everyone or many major organizations in the world have erred or lapsed or done bad things to greater or lesser extents. And so when that happens, you start to doubt everything that they do. Certain CIA Cold War experiments become public knowledge, and suddenly, well, the same government that did this crazy mind control thing now claims to have landed on the moon. How much do I believe them? They said they weren't doing this. They were caught doing it. Now they say they did do this amazing thing. I bet they didn't do it.
And I'll sound off on that with confirmation bias. When we start to believe one way or another about something, let's say I already have a mistrust of the government, then I'm primed now to latch on or to spot any piece of information that affirms that, and to gloss over or maybe miss or ignore pieces of information that contradict that. So someone who believes that in this conspiracy or that with the government or isn't trusting it will then be much more likely to say, aha, yeah, that's right, the shadow does fall the wrong way. You can't trust them. And you see that playing out with you're right, government's a great example, but with you can see this with even other things too, a relationship. If I have a student who lied to me once, then all of a sudden I'm going to be looking at everything that student does from a different angle, and I may interpret an innocent mistake as dishonesty because I'm primed to see it that way.
Right. And then when his friend backs him up and says, no, Mr. Tim, he didn't actually cheat on the test, now it's a conspiracy.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, yeah, but just and confirmation bias is something that we all indulge in. And if you don't, you do, and you just don't realize it. And so, that's one of the things that you can look to be aware of and pay attention to and try to moderate in yourself. But it's a human tendency, and it helps feed into these conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I think we talked about some of these related issues, when we talked about philosophical. What were those called? We had a philosophy episode here a year or two ago where we
The
discussed.
logical fallacies, maybe.
That's the one, logical
Yeah.
fallacies,
And
and
and we also talked about the razors.
yeah,
Oh, yeah,
and that was
that's
going to bring
right.
up as well. And I actually
Right.
now I've got 4 steps.
Sponsored by the shaving cartel.
I've got 4 steps to be able to help avoid conspiracy theories and or ferret out the truth that I want to hit here at the end. But I did want to discuss a few other conspiracy theories, some that I wasn't even fully aware of until recently.
Hey, Carl, can I real quick, while we're on it, can I plug in one more reason why we tend to believe conspiracy theories before we
shoot.
go on that? Okay. And this is the English teacher in me coming out, but one of the universal traits of humanity is story. Everyone is a storyteller. We all love stories. We all the time, and we see the world in stories. And one of the things that I think makes us prone to believe conspiracy theories is that conspiracy theories can turn a series of random events into a story. So it's a lens through which we see the world. And I think people in general, and myself included, we don't really understand what randomness is and how randomness can appear. So a series of random events, when I see them, I want to, as a human, I want to attribute cause, meaning behind those events, and so a series of just like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but
So a really good one, if you want to familiarize yourself with randomness, is look back at some of Learn It from a Layman's early podcast topics.
That's right.
What is the reason?
And then understand that the reason is going to be pretty disappointing. And I'm going to come back to this point later, but yeah. Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
No worries. I'll give a historical example. Say I'm in a European medieval nation, and there's a famine. The harvest goes south, and then there's a typhoid outbreak. And then a fire. Now these things are just random events. It's just bad luck, bad things happening. But as a human, I want to. There's a purpose. There's a meaning to this. Someone or something is to blame, and so historically, you'd find communities would often find a scapegoat. Could have been an individual, or more often than not, a group of people. Often Jewish communities were the scapegoats in medieval Europe, and so when things would happen, the Jews would get blamed. Look at Germany in the mid 1900s. Who's to blame for our woes and our problems? Well, it's those Jews, and so let's do something.
Ironically, it's the Jewish conspiracy.
Yeah, so. There you go. Yeah, and so it was this cabal of Jewish money lenders and blah blah blah, and so this conspiracy, and that conspiracy got trotted out and rolled around for generations, centuries. But it's very compelling to see a story and to see meaning behind random events, and so we want to see that story. And conspiracy theories serve that human need. So especially when we're primed, when I'm already don't like that group of people or whatever, a conspiracy theory is very satisfactory to the human need to see a story in things and see purpose. So
that explains. So Tim is the podcast scapegoat, and we have
that's right.
Learn It from a Layman conspiracy that Tim is actively sabotaging the podcast.
So I'm going to come back to this point when we talk about how to identify conspiracies and what to do about them. But with that, did you want to launch into a few others?
Couple other ones. Yep. Okay, so there's the JFK assassination.
He
Well,
did get assassinated.
well, that's not a conspiracy theory.
Okay.
That's not a conspiracy theory. But
Are you
Lee
talking
Harvey
about the one where
Oswald,
he's still alive?
is it Elvis? No. No, the Lee Harvey Oswald, who was then killed by Jack Ruby, right? Um,
Yeah.
and then the idea that this was all a setup, this was, a whole host of different conspiracy theories about what actually happened at the JFK assassination and who was behind it and how, and so uh, I think I've heard a couple different explanations, but generally just that Lee Harvey Oswald was a plant. He wasn't actually the person that shot JFK, and he had to be taken out. So that's one I think slightly predate. I mean, JFK, I was aware of that obviously situation, but in my generation, it wasn't like the topic du jour, and so I'm not as familiar with the conspiracy theories going along with that. But I know that there is some question as far as like, okay, they're still classified documents, so does that mean that the government's hiding something? And I guess by definition, if it's a classified document, the government is, keeping information internal for some reason or the other. But yeah, the once we move on once again to kind of ways to avoid getting falling into conspiracy theory rabbit holes, we'll talk about ways that you can avoid and or identify what might be the truth here. But that's one that I think everyone's familiar with, the JFK one. I generally knew, so this is the September 11th conspiracy theory. I didn't really know that there was actively a group of people that believed our government, this in the United States, actually perpetrated the events of 9/11, or at least allowed them to happen. I didn't know that was actually a group of people that believed that until relatively recently, and at first it made me a bit angry. Uh, that yes, it made me angry that there were people out there that believed that. But yeah, the idea there is that the government was either aware of it or party to the events of the day of 9/11, where the Twin Towers were attacked, and the Pentagon, and then the downed plane in Pennsylvania, and the lots of explanations for why the government wanted to do this, so that they could then go to war in the Middle East and get oil or whatever it may have been. And that they, wanted to start this war because anyway. And so the idea that this was all orchestrated, and that I think I even heard something along the lines of like the plane that went down in the Pennsylvania field had been like they had dropped off the people first, and because there's no luggage, they weren't able to find any luggage in the wreckage, and therefore people weren't actually on the plane. I don't know, just some silliness. And like I said, at first it was a visceral reaction to me. I was I was angry that could be someone's point of view, and that people could not understand basic realities. But once again, you have to kind of, in order to take someone's from one place to another place, you have to understand what got them there in the first place. So that's a conspiracy theory that, like I said, I wasn't even entirely aware that there was actually people that believe that, but there are, and it's a group of people out there. So, well, another one, let's say I just found this one out last year, and this would point us, I guess, at the World War II podcast that Matt's been doing for us over the last 6 months or so, and that's the Pearl Harbor conspiracy, and that's the idea that the government actually knew. And the reality is, and Matt walks us through this in the World War II podcast, is the government knew that something was going to happen. We knew that there was going to be an attack somewhere.
No, not exactly.
Okay. Well, we knew that there was some potential, at least. We just didn't know when or where, right?
Still not exactly. The whole thing was a surprise attack, so called because it was a surprise.
Right. We knew that people were moving in the Pacific, but we didn't know what exactly was going on, I guess is the point.
Yeah,
and by we, I mean the United States government knew that there were preparations for war in the Pacific, but we didn't know specifically, obviously. And once
Yeah,
again,
nowhere close to us. I mean, the Japanese have been engaged with the British and others for some time, but
right. So yeah,
or
this is a
I'm sorry, not
conspiracy
the
theory.
British, the Chinese, the Chinese.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's kind of part of what you could call a blanket category of conspiracies, which is a bad thing happened and the government knew about it in advance and either
Yes.
caused it or did nothing about it so as to benefit somehow.
Right.
And if I could comment on that, I think that illustrates another reason why conspiracy theories happen. They serve a need. So conspiracy theories often, and these are not all my own ideas, by the way. So should
Yeah,
give
I
credit.
know. You hear them from the chips in your mind.
That's right. The voices tell me.
Are you saying that not all the conspiracy theories are your specific ideas?
Which makes me jealous because no, but many oftentimes they rise out of fear, moments of fear and uncertainty, and as humans we don't like that. So when when America gets bombed out of nowhere, and it is defenseless to prepare or repel it, like 9/11 or December 7th, Pearl Harbor, that's very unsettling. And so embracing the cold hard truth that we are vulnerable to that kind of thing is hard to swallow. And so it's easier in some ways to say, well, no, we can't be that vulnerable. There must have been something else. It must be an inside job. There was and so now we can explain it. Now we can control it, and so conspiracy theories play into that need to control our environment, to cope with fear and with the unknown.
So weirdly, tragically, we're seeing the same thing play out in Russia right now, where, if you haven't noticed, things are going catastrophically badly for Russia. And the types of explanations for why that you start seeing in Russian media are inventive, because you need some explanation. There's no way that our army can be doing this bad unless all these other external factors are to blame, or it's an inside job, or whatever.
And so you start to see people get sacked, the kind of the fallout of that kind of conspiracy theory type reasoning, right? It must be, well, then we're going to, and that's why you see all the scapegoating and in any of these kinds of movements, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it is totally being used as a scapegoating thing. People are, this belief, this fear, this inexplicability is being used to round up and get rid of a number of undesirables over there. So, yeah.
Okay.
Russia, the land where conspiracy theories are not theory anymore.
We have a Russian listener or two, so if you are in Russia listening to us,
Slava Ukraini. Sorry, but yeah.
For your own
we
sake,
do have a couple of
Ukrainian
listeners. We have a few Ukrainian listeners, and yes, we're obviously aware of the tragedies going on in Ukraine, and hope that they can. I mean, simply that they can beat the Russians and get their country back. I get that things are slightly more complicated than, especially in the Eastern. Anyway, we won't go into the whole Russia war.
No, we won't. We probably shouldn't have. And I'm sorry, we veer off into these things.
That's okay.
Sorry is the wrong word, but let's get back to conspiracy theories.
Yes, exactly.
It does.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to hit four more really quickly, and these are all more like in the last 4 or 5 years. People are quite familiar with these ones. And then we'll talk about ways that we can, the 4 steps I've got, and then Matt and Tim, I think, want a few more words about how you can avoid being duped into conspiracy theories. But so there's the Obama birtherism, the idea that Barack Obama, former president of the United States,
was born. That's the thing.
Yes.
No, he's
but that the idea that it was a cover up, that he was as far as his birth certificate was concerned, that he wasn't actually born in the United States. He wasn't born in Hawaii. He was actually born in either, I'm not entirely sure where they believe, where
Kenya is
people
the big
birth.
one that
Yeah, I was
comes
going to
up.
say, I think it was Kenya. I know that, and then some people thought, okay, but he was a naturalized citizen of the Java or Indonesia somewhere, and therefore lost his U.S. citizenship, or I don't know. Anyway, but the idea that his whole presidency was actually a based on a lie, that he wasn't actually eligible to even be elected president because he wasn't actually from our country and or a citizen. So that has been debunked thoroughly. So we'll move on.
So that one, yeah. I'll come back to a how to recognize if you're being victimized by conspiracy theory, and we'll talk about that.
Okay.
But yes.
Yeah, so there's the flat Earth, and I think that one has just a very small group of adherents to it, because
small but fun, great at parties.
Yeah, very very fun, very exciting. I mean, if you can choose to believe that the Earth is flat in today's day, you have a unique gift.
Yeah, well, this is one where it really is, the definitions of conspiracy. You have people definitely trying to cover up the way things are. Now, the one place where flat earthing really falls down is, what on earth does anyone have to gain by pretending that the earth is round when it isn't? I don't get that part. But
Right.
I mean, the rest of it, is very much, you have a whole bunch of people working together to obscure truth. NASA, government, um, Elon Musk, anyone who has ever been involved in space launch,
Right.
are all
Which is a
maliciously
classic
obscuring.
sign of a conspiracy theory, right? The more complex and vast the network of people required to prop up your story, again, Occam's razor, the less likely it is that it's actually real.
Right. So flat Earth, yeah. So I mean, that one's self-explanatory. People believe the Earth is flat, which is truly crazy.
And that is our line, unless the Flat Earther Society sponsors us, in which case we will retract.
Us on Patreon at earth.flat.com. You are definitely the guys that we want to keep around.
Okay. So then recently, all the conspiracies and the various ideas around COVID, both of the origins of COVID and what the government had to do with COVID, and vaccines and all of these things. We could talk about that for a long time, but we have other podcasts where you can listen to some of our discussions about COVID, because it's been obviously 2 years since all of that went down. But yeah, the idea that there's some cover up about either where it came from and or how it was handled and or the vaccine related to COVID. So
pandemic.
Right. So, and then lastly, and this one I don't even know too much about it because it seems silly, but QAnon, is that how you can say it? It's QAnon, right?
Yes.
That's not really a conspiracy as much as a bunch of people that see everything as one.
They believe QAnon people, my understanding, is something to do with how a particular group of traffickers somehow.
Here, Carl, I can fill you in. Okay.
That's right. You live in Arizona.
That's right. Yeah, we know. We are. Darn it. We've seen the truth. Anyways, a shadowy international cabal of pedophiles is running everything, and so anything basically the deep state, they're really running the show, and if you really knew what was going on,
and specifically, somehow this is tied to the fact that Trump didn't get reelected, right?
Oh, sure.
Anyway,
everything is everything bad is the shadowy cabal.
Right. and yeah, I don't know much about that one, to be candid, but
That
but
Oh, sorry. I'll just say this one is the fun thing about this one is this charismatic and enigmatic Q. There's actually this figure out there, or who knows if it's one or more than one, that will post stuff, and nobody knows their identity and blah blah blah. So it's very mysterious, kind of that Zorro style. It gives an added splash of flavor to this particular conspiracy theory.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, some of these are really fun, candidly. I mean, besides reality and facts and truth, some of these are just really, I mean, really interesting. Like, how did you come up with this?
There is a great one that I wanted to bring up. It's I think the website is like manhasnotflown.com or something. And it's basically, the conspiracy is that every time you see an airplane in flight, it's a projection. No one has ever actually traveled, and if your neighbors ever tell you that they've flown somewhere, they were either duped or they're lying to you.
So how did I get from
Now,
where
what
I
you
was?
don't get is that this thing was founded by a bunch of airline pilots who were having fun. And,
That's awesome.
it goes from there.
Good times.
Yeah,
That's
really
fun.
good times.
Okay.
But,
All right. I'm going to hit on my 4 steps to avoid being, duped and or conspiracy theorized. And then Matt and Cameron's on here. Matt and Tim can add whatever they want to add. As far as the 4 steps, I think that you need to avoid falling prey to these is something we've already discussed, but these are my 4 steps specifically. Is 1, be educated. And while it's true that understanding quantum physics and calculus and philosophy, all these different scientific fields, doesn't actually necessarily address any one of these conspiracy theories directly, it does kind of give you the analytical thinking necessary to be and critical thinking necessary to be able to pull apart particular things and figure out whether or not they're true. So better understanding of scientific principles and or reason in general can help you develop a critical and analytical mind that will be able to identify truth, ideally. So be educated, number 1. 2, Hanlon's razor, and this is, like I said, we talked about these razors before. Tim's brought up Occam's razor in this podcast. Hanlon's razor, though, I think this one's particularly pertinent to conspiracy theories, and that's never attribute to malice that which can be attributed to stupidity. And so this especially goes to the ones where like everyone loves to blame the government for, or the government knew ahead of time. And the reality is the government is a whole group of people, many of them who do their jobs well and some of them who do not. And so the reality is that if we can attribute to the government, if not stupidity, at least ineptness, that's probably more accurate than
why you got to be hating on the government so much?
It's probably more likely to be true than a whole group of government people that are maliciously trying to influence world events in a particular way. So Hanlon's razor, number 2. Number 3, be open to contrary viewpoints. So if and we have out of hand dismissed some of these conspiracy theories that I brought up, but that's not actually except for, like I said, for QAnon, which I'm not familiar with. But for the rest of them, I'm at least familiar with the other point, what people claim on the other side of the coin, and therefore, because I'm familiar with both sides, I can say, okay, it turns out I can identify misinformation and or just bad thinking in these conspiracy theories that helps me recognize that the other point of view is true. And so being open to contrary viewpoints, if you just listen in the echo chamber of your group, then you are far more likely to fall prey to conspiracy theories. And number 4, consider the number of people involved. And so Tim brought this up just a minute ago, and that's if the moon landing were not true, right? If the United States did not send people to the moon, how many people needed to be in on that secret? Hundreds, probably at a minimum hundreds, right? And how likely are hundreds of people to not slip somewhere along the line and actually let fall the idea that, oh, yeah, actually we didn't go to the moon.
For
So the number,
decades. Yeah.
right, over decades. Conspiracy theories that generally turn out actually to not be conspiracy theories and or true, just are the ones where it's small groups of people that are trying to cover something up, not organizations. It doesn't work quite like that. And so consider the number of people involved, number 4. So those are my 4 steps to not being duped. Matt, you had some things that you wanted to address?
Yeah, so just one of my own razors. I've made my professional career in a fairly high-tech field, and I've dealt with all kinds of stuff, including lunar-related things. And one of the things that I have learned, and this is going to go a little bit contrary to the fact that the moon landing happened, is that in general, the explanation for some weird event or question is always the most mundane and disappointing. So it's not there's no cabal, there's no group of people. It's just a thing went wrong, or somebody like missed a phone call. It's any number of things, but whatever the question is, the explanation is the most mundane, and that's the correct one, or the correct explanation is the most mundane.
Can
Now,
we call that Matt's razor?
yeah. Does this always hold true? Not really. But in general, it's a good one. The other one, and I don't know if you kind of maybe touched on this, but is look at how the argument or the theory is pitched to you. If it's based on an emotional reaction or tie, then that should be a red flag. And it's likely wrong. So,
yeah,
any kind of
outrage or
if we're stirring people up to outrage or passion, something is amiss. And unfortunately you see this with far too many things in life. But yeah, watch out for that.
Quite. All right, Tim.
I'll kind of follow up on that by adding another emotion, disdain. If you ever find your primary emotion to be disdain, then that I would add that as a red flag as well. I often see that people indulging in conspiracy theories on either side of the ideological spectrum feel great disdain for those who don't believe it or don't see it. So if you find yourself reacting with disdain to another group, that very possibly means that you are teetering away from towards the fringe where conspiracy theories live. And keep in mind, this doesn't mean you have to agree with people that your opponents in religious or political or international interactions, but when you stop trying to understand people, then it becomes easier to see them as not as people, but as the characters in this disdain or in this conspiracy story.
This conspiracy story, yeah.
Yeah, and you see that a lot with conspiracy theories. One of the things that they do is they tend to turn round complex, multifaceted people into flat, single characteristic caricatures. Go back to the Red Scare in the 1950s. Everyone who if you're against us, then you're one of them, and all of a sudden you're just a mindless, commie sympathizer. Anyways,
also the French Revolution, the Red Revolution, the White Revolution, any number of those things.
The Cultural Revolution, yeah. No, so anyways, and that's just a variation on what you were saying, Matt, about emotion. But yeah, just some examples there. One thing that I'll add is owning and recognizing our moment. It's interesting. I was reading about conspiracy theories a bit on this, and the author talked about how fringe ideas, things that were these kind of wacky, they existed, but they were on the fringe. Have swept into the mainstream in recent years, and I'm no expert on this, but I'll hazard that part of the reason for that is because our wild west of information that characterizes the internet information age has made it much easier to propagate misinformation, information out of context, deep fakes and all this stuff, and also much more difficult to investigate and verify information's veracity. Um, 30, 40 years ago, when you know before the turn of the century, most information was mediated and moderated by a relatively small um, institution that the media, which back then consisted of a handful of print and broadcasting corporations that were far from perfect, but also had a kind of unifying purpose in providing information, and so there was a kind of unity. Even if there was disagreement ideologically, there was unity about what the facts were and where they came from, to some degree. Obviously, that's a huge oversimplification, but compared to the current environment, where much information is not mediated through say professional news sources at all. I have to be careful, of course, because a number of conspiracies out there hold that news sources are conspirators themselves. Anyways, so my whole point with this is recognize the moment. We need to be much more skeptical of the things that we see on social media, and we need to be skeptical of and forgiving ourselves, and recognize that we're probably going to be duped by stuff. I won't get into examples, but
Yeah, and also note that this does not apply to the moon landing. That's one you can believe in.
Yes, that's right. Okay, and two last little things. Beware of research frozen in time. One of the tools that I see perpetrators of conspiracy theories using is they've checked out of the conversation, or they've frozen the conversation in time at a previous moment, and so nothing that has happened since then is part of their repertoire of information. I'll use again the vaccines and autism example. There was some study way back in the day that asserted a link between vaccines and autism. Now that was challenged and professionally reviewed and debunked and discredited. But that doesn't stop the conspiracy theorists from grasping onto that item, that research, whatever, that study, and using it. And even though the conversation in the field of vaccines and pediatric health and all that has moved way, way beyond it and past it, so that research gets frozen in time. You still see that same kind of thing with the COVID vaccines, where people who want to indulge in conspiracy theories about that will latch onto statements and assertions and things from way earlier in the conversation, and the conversation has developed and changed since then, but that doesn't prevent someone from going back and saying, well, they said this. If you're not keeping up with the conversation, that's a red flag that you're indulging this kind of thinking. And last thing, and then I'll stop talking, beware of cherry-picked research. It's another tool of conspiracy theorists. If there are 99 scientists who are saying such and such thing, a good conspiracy theorist will find that one scientist who said something different, whether it's about climate change, vaccine science, his, commonly, consensus historical facts and those kinds of things. All they got to do is cherry pick that one thing. So again, part of it is being aware of the conversation. If you're not in tune with the conversation and what the whole conversation is, and just cherry picking, that's prime fodder for conspiracy theory to flourish.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, I'm going to say also allsides.com. Check it out. Great site.
Also, manhasneverflown.com. Going down that rabbit hole right now.
Yes. But not flying down it.
No one ever has. Okay. One other thing, just last, I think also something that happens frequently in these scenarios is ad hominem attacks or similar type ideas where someone that you either don't like, or someone says something that you don't like, therefore you find a reason to not like them, and therefore you can discredit everything that they say and their viewpoint. People that have the truth are not that are still imperfect, right? So people that are espousing the actual set of facts might misstate something sometimes. That doesn't mean that therefore they're part of the conspiracy theory. That just means that they were mistaken when they said that one thing that they said. So.
And sometimes people lie. Sometimes people are dishonest or craven.
Sure.
And that doesn't mean it's a conspiracy. Sometimes
right.
They're just trying to protect themselves, or maybe trying to enrich themselves. That does happen.
Right.
But it's not a conspiracy.
Right. And that's, people have political motives. People have particular belief systems. All those things can be true, and it can still be the case that your conspiracy theory falls apart upon further inspection. So, I think this has been a useful conversation. Hopefully, you can go ahead and identify these things in the wild and be prepared to not fall prey to them.
The truth is out there.
Yeah.
Yes, and if you're concerned that we just took all your fun away and that we're saying no conspiracy theory is true and the world is mundane, like Matt said,
refer back to Matt's razor. That's how it. Yes.
If that saddens you, though, you can go ahead and listen to our quantum physics podcast and recognize that the world, while not full of conspiracy theories, is still pretty interesting and wild. So when Schrodinger's cat is a thing, that's still interesting and not a conspiracy theory. So. Go back and listen to other podcasts. Appreciate Matt and Tim tonight, and we will sign off with that.